Dan Hurley is considering leaving UConn after back-to-back national titles to take the head coaching job with the Los Angeles Lakers. Another reminder how lucky Gonzaga fans are with Mark Few.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Friday. Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Folks, we're talking Dan Hurley today, the news on Thursday morning, very early Thursday morning, that the Los Angeles Lakers are preparing to make a big-time offer to bring Dan Hurley as their next head coach. We're going to talk about that, what his potential departure would mean for Gonzaga. They're playing them this year. All those players at UConn can now enter the transfer portal. Again, assuming Danny takes the job. It has not happened as I'm recording this right now. We'll talk about the implications of all of that. We'll close out the show talking about the WCC schedule. We don't know the dates or the times, but we know which teams out of the WCC Gonzaga is going to be playing twice, which teams they're only going to face one time next season. We'll talk about that to get you out and ready for the weekend. But first, Thursday morning, bright and early, everybody, even on the East Coast, people were woken up nice and early by a tweet from Adrian Wojnarowski indicating that the Los Angeles Lakers are putting together an offer to Danny Hurley, the head coach of the UConn Huskies. He has won back-to-back national championships for the first time since Billy Donovan and the Florida Gators did it in 2007 and 2008. This is a huge, massive storyline. It is effectively the biggest brand in basketball, the biggest NBA brand, the Los Angeles Lakers, pursuing the most successful, and I'm willing to say it, best coach in college basketball after winning back-to-back titles. That is a monumental, seismic move in the college basketball landscape. Whatever decision happens, either Danny will have rejected both Kentucky and the Lakers in the same offseason, or he will leave after winning back-to-back titles, after helping convince Alex Karaban to remove his name from the NBA draft process. He will then depart, leave UConn. That entire roster becomes subject to the potentials of the transfer portal. It is a chaotic potential scenario. Either way, huge, huge thing. Here are the updates, what we have here as I'm recording this on Thursday afternoon. It sounds like Danny's he's not going to try to drag this out, hoping to have a decision by the end of the weekend. So hopefully something that we can kind of get some clarity on going into next week. Hurley has met with his team. He did tell the team that this is happening, that he is getting this offer, that he is going to be mulling over this decision. He's not hiding it from them. He's not pretending it's not happening or saying, oh, the media is blowing it up. He is being upfront and forthright and saying, hey, this is something that is going on. I think the timing here is very odd. The Lakers have had an open head coaching job for like a month. They fired Darvin Ham pretty much as soon as their season ended. I don't know why we're very suddenly finding out about Dan Hurley. And that's the truth. It doesn't sound like, oh, they've been secretly talking for weeks, because in that situation, it would make Danny look a lot worse if he had been trying to convince Alex Karaban to come back to school while knowing that he was considering taking this job with the Lakers. But it doesn't sound like that's the reality. It sounds like this kind of cropped up last minute. There's reports that people within the Lakers front office were shocked, or within the Lakers staff were shocked to find out that they were pursuing Hurley. So I think this was kind of a last minute thing. But look, this is the Mecca NBA job. He turned down the premier job in college basketball at Kentucky. He said money wasn't a factor. He wanted to stay in Storrs. He's a Northeast guy. But the Lakers is a different breed. It's a different animal. It's a chance to coach in the NBA. Danny has said before that the only thing that would convince him to leave UConn is an opportunity to coach in the NBA. This is that. It's not only an NBA job. It's not the Detroit Pistons. It's the Los Angeles Lakers. It's LeBron James. It's Anthony Davis. It's a chance to coach a team to prove that you can win a championship at the toughest level of basketball in the entire world. You get a chance to coach a premier, iconic player in LeBron James. It is a tough decision for Danny Hurley to make here. He's also, like we said, a locked-in East Coast guy. He didn't take the job at Pitt a long time ago because he didn't want to move that far from home. Pitt's a heck of a lot closer to his home than Los Angeles is. But again, different animal, different breed, different conversation. Right now, we just don't know. Danny's the reports, John Fanta indicated this, Dana O'Neill at The Athletic indicated this. It sounds like he's truly 50-50. And it also sounds like, again, I'm recording this less than 24 hours after it sounds like he was starting to really start to hear these rumors and get an indication that this was happening. So he's still processing. He's still making these decisions. He's still trying to decide what he wants to do, what makes the most sense for him, for his family. But there is no situation where this is not a massive deal in college basketball, in the NBA, whether he takes the job, whether he doesn't take the job. This moves the needle in a monstrous way in college athletics. That's what happens when you're one of the premier coaches in the sport, when you've won back-to-back titles. It's been an incredible year of coaching carousel, not even just in college basketball, although in basketball to have the Kentucky job, the Arkansas job, the USC job, potentially the UConn job, all open in the same season, to have iconic figures like John Calipari moving homes, like Eric Musselman, now potentially Danny Hurley. We're still only a year removed from the Bob Huggins situation. Louisville has a new head coach. That's a ton of significant movement in college basketball. And then on the football side, you have Jim Harbaugh and Nick Saban. It's just an extraordinary amount of changes happening in college coaching. I know some people will look at this, especially if it does happen for Danny, and point to it as some kind of indictment. Oh, coaches don't want to be in college sports anymore. It's too hard with the transfer portal, with NIL. And look, we've made that argument on the show before. I've talked about the fact that there's no offseason for coaches. Coaching is very hard right now in the modern era. A coach leaving for the Los Angeles Lakers is not an indictment on college athletics. There has never been a time in the history of college basketball where the Los Angeles Lakers head coaching job wasn't a more kind of premier perceived destination than staying in college. If Danny leaves UConn to go to the Lakers, it is not a sign that college basketball is dying. It is a sign that the Los Angeles Lakers can still pull their weight, that they are still that level where they can make that kind of hire. I want to be clear about that. I don't think that this, if it goes the way that many think it will with Hurley leaving, it's not a sign of any kind of problem in college basketball, not any more than there are currently some things that people don't like about the direction college athletics is going. But I don't think this would be some big grandiose kind of panic, fear-mongering situation. It's just a really good coach getting an opportunity to coach the Los Angeles Lakers. For the Zags, they're playing UConn December 14th, Madison Square Garden. Whether Danny Hurley's on the sideline or not has a pretty big implication on what that roster is going to look like. We will talk more about that in the second segment, but obviously players could enter the transfer portal. It could be a very new look roster. What we do know, if Danny Hurley's not the head coach, that is another one of Gonzaga's premier marquee non-conference games where they'll be facing a new coach, because they're going to play Kentucky this year. Kentucky's not going to be coached by John Calipari. It will be coached by Mark Pope, former BYU head coach. They're going to play Washington this year. Washington, been coached by Mike Hopkins for the last 8 years or so, now coached by Danny Sprinkle, the former Montana State and Utah State head coach, taking over for the first time. So if this situation with Hurley develops, 3 of Gonzaga's marquee non-conference games will be against new coaches. Doesn't really mean anything, not super significant, just a unique fact. Gonzaga will also play Washington State twice next year. They'll play Pepperdine twice next year. They'll play Pacific once next year. We'll get to that to close out the show. All 3 of those programs have new coaches as well. So lots of new faces on the sidelines for Mark Few and the Zags to get used to. But Mark Few's kind of used to that. He's used to being somebody who's seeing new faces on the sidelines while he's still in the same spot year after year after year after year. And folks, this is another opportunity for us to just be thankful. Mark Few could have left 15, 18, 20 years ago when Indiana came calling, when Oregon came calling. There's reports of many other programs who've called, probably a lot of phone calls that we'll never hear about that have happened over the last 25 years. And if Mark Few had won back-to-back championships and the Lakers called him, I don't know what he would have done. I don't know that we can pretend that there's 0 situations ever where Mark Few would have left the Gonzaga basketball program. But it's been 25 years, and whatever situations have cropped up have not convinced him to leave. Gonzaga's not in this position without Mark Few. Not even close to being in this position. And it's because he's been here day after day, month after month, year after year, decade after decade. Mark Few stays. The UConn Huskies have had an unprecedented amount of success since 1999 when Mark Few took over the head coach. They've also had a whole bunch of different coaches, and they've had a bunch of bad years. Gonzaga hasn't had any bad years. They haven't had the same highs. They haven't had the same lows either. It's a product of Mark Few staying here, being here forever. This hurts for UConn. It hurts for their players if this happens. It hurts for their fan base. But it's something that Gonzaga just hasn't had to deal with. And I think it's always worth remembering and feeling that kind of fortuitous that Gonzaga has not been in the position where they've had to restart or they've had to lose their players or lose their coach and kind of be anxious about what the next season is going to look like because they don't know who's going to be on the sidelines. Just not an issue that Gonzaga's really run into. Now, if Danny does leave for the Lakers, what might that mean for somebody like Aidan Mahaney, who committed to UConn this offseason? What does it mean for Alex Karaban, who could enter the transfer portal? Could Gonzaga get involved in this situation, make this situation at UConn somehow to Gonzaga's advantage? We're going to talk about all that in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, eBay Motors. Folks, passion, drive, patience, that's the formula for winning championships, and it's also what helps keep your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits to LED headlights, and more. Whether you are into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts to choose from for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. Plus, with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your car every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that W. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, folks. Segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're still talking Danny Hurley of the Los Angeles Lakers. Once again, as I'm recording this Thursday afternoon, this is not finalized. In fact, the most recent updates are that the Lakers are still preparing the offer to UConn or to Danny Hurley from UConn. UConn is also in the conversations of signing him to an extension, something that was happening previously. They're not doing this just in response to this offer, although they're probably going to have to up the money dollar amount here to keep Danny Hurley in Storrs, Connecticut. But that's the situation right now. It sounds like it's going to be resolved over the weekend. Either Danny Hurley will return to UConn, quest for a three-peat, spurn the Lakers and Kentucky in the same offseason, or he will leave. And if that happens, this is a monumental shift in college basketball because every single player on UConn's roster would then have 30 days to choose whether they want to enter the transfer portal. 30 days from the day Danny Hurley leaves his position at UConn. Those players then have 30 days. That includes current players on the roster who have never once touched the transfer portal, who've never been in any situation where they're planning to leave. That includes incoming transfers like Aidan Mahaney, like Terrace Reed from Michigan. It includes Alex Karaban, who withdrew his name from the NBA draft in order to return to UConn, but he could still enter the transfer portal if Danny Hurley leaves. Obviously, incoming freshmen in the 2024 class who are planning to be on this team next year could choose to decommit and look elsewhere. That's always an option that incoming freshmen have, but certainly could be more of a relevant factor if Danny's not there. And then future commitments, 2025, 2026, any players that UConn has signed to a deal or has gotten a verbal commitment from, again, those players always have the option to change their mind, and we might see that happen with this situation if it develops the way that many think that it will. Basically, the simplest way to explain this, it's open season. There are no rules in college basketball. There's not anything stopping this from happening. Here's what I'm going to tell you right now. We'll talk about Aidan Mahaney because he's the one that the Zag fans know the most. But if you're a Gonzaga fan, you know the name Alex Karaban. You've seen Alex Karaban at least 3 times, most likely, as they have played each other. You've probably seen him in a couple national championship games. You've seen him against Gonzaga twice in the last 2 years in the NCAA tournament, or 3 times in the last 2 years in the NCAA tournament in Seattle. Those 2 times. And then, of course, this upcoming season as well in December 14th. Alex Karaban has probably gotten 40 phone calls since the report came out that Danny Hurley is being pursued by the Lakers. And you might think, oh, that's tampering. Are they allowed to do that? Doesn't matter. I can almost guarantee you, and I will name coaches specifically, and I don't know exactly who's called him, but I would be stunned if Mark Pope hasn't put in a phone call. If John Calipari hasn't put in a phone call, if Rick Pitino hasn't put in a phone call, Rodney Terry at Texas, Chris Beard at Ole Miss, I'd be stunned if those Eric Musselman, I'd be stunned if those coaches haven't put in a call here. Anybody who has an open scholarship, they're making a call to Alex Karaban. Louisville, Pat Kelsey. Apparently they're willing to pony up the $2 million that Coleman Hawkins is asking for from Illinois. Alex Karaban, much better than Coleman Hawkins. I would rather spend $2 million on Alex Karaban in a heartbeat than I would on Coleman Hawkins. No disrespect to Coleman, but Alex Karaban is just better. He's going to command a huge amount of money, and he's already getting those phone calls. Now, mind you, if Hurley stays, Karaban cannot leave. So Kentucky can call him and say, we'll give you $5 million. I don't think that's going to happen, mind you. But if that were to happen and Karaban says, wow, that's an incredible amount of money, that's life-changing, he can't go anywhere unless Danny leaves. But if Danny leaves, he can put his name in the transfer portal. He can be gone. And I guarantee you those conversations, they're already happening. Aidan Mahaney would have the opportunity to reopen he can do that technically if he hasn't signed a contract. I don't know what his situation is. If he's enrolled in classes, that's a little bit more complicated. But Aidan Mahaney could, in theory, reopen his recruitment, look for another school. And this is where I think a big factor for UConn. If Dan Hurley leaves, they have to do whatever they can to promote internally one of two assistant coaches in the program, Luke Murray, the son of Bill Murray, incidentally, and Kimani Young. Those two guys are phenomenal assistant coaches, two of the best in the entire country. Alex Karaban has directly said that he believes that he has three head coaches at UConn: Dan Hurley, Luke Murray, Kimani Young. The star player on your team returning for a third year when he could have been a first-round pick in the NBA draft, indicating that he believes all three of those coaches are on a basically equal playing field. If one of those coaches becomes the new head coach, that is a huge ability for this team to keep their talent together. If Karaban stays because Luke Murray gets promoted as head coach, and Mahaney stays, and Liam McNeely stays, and the developmental pieces who are stepping into bigger roles, Hassan Diarra, Solomon Ball, Samson Johnson, whomever, if those guys all stay, that's a huge win for UConn. I don't think those guys stay if they have to hire externally. I also don't know if they'll get the opportunity to hire those guys internally. What I mean by that is if Dan Hurley's negotiating with the Lakers, one of the things he's probably going to advocate for is that he wants to bring his staff with him. He wants to bring his guys. Those guys would go from being lead assistant coaches at the collegiate level, which is a lucrative job, to lead assistant coaches with the Los Angeles Lakers, which is a more lucrative job. They would have to want to do it. It's possible one of them says, hey, I'd actually rather just take over here at UConn. My career goal has always been to be a head coach at the Division I level. I don't want to jump to the NBA. I want to stay here. And if they do that and one of them stays, or the best case scenario for UConn, outside of Hurley staying, the best case for them is keeping both these coaches. If that happens, I think UConn can kind of keep this core together. If not, if they have to hire externally, they might have some serious issues keeping talent together. What does it mean for Gonzaga? Well, certainly it impacts the game that they're playing in December. If they're playing a roster that's coached by a different coach that has a bunch of different players on it, it impacts that game. I don't think it's so dramatic that like UConn's going to plummet in the standings and it's actually going to be a negative game for them in the net rankings. Like I wouldn't don't be concerning yourself with that. That's not something that anybody should be worrying about in June. So don't worry about that. But it changes the dynamic of that game. Certainly, it's not a game against Dan Hurley and the back-to-back national champion UConn Huskies. It's a game against new coach, new players. Just happens to be wearing the uniform of the team that won back-to-back championships. So it changes the dynamic of that game pretty significantly. In terms of Gonzaga's roster, they're at 12 scholarships right now. They have been looking at potentially adding a 13th player that would be like a young developmental big. There's not a lot of options on UConn's roster that I think really fit naturally. I will mention Liam McNeely again, because Liam McNeely was a target for Gonzaga before he committed to Indiana. And then when he decommitted from Indiana, Gonzaga was once again involved in trying to recruit him to Spokane. He then committed to UConn. Liam McNeely is a 6'6" wing. He's top 10 in the class of 2024. He's one of the best incoming freshmen in the country. But he doesn't really fit a need for Gonzaga. 6'6" wings, they got plenty of them. They're planning to play 3-guard lineups with Caliph Battle. They got Michael Ajayi in the mix. They have Steele Venters is healthy. They have Dusty Stromer. They have Emmanuel Innocente. They have current and future spots taken up in that kind of 6'6" wing range. Liam McNeely is extremely good. And I'm not saying you should completely ignore him if he becomes available just because you already have players at those positions. It's hard to imagine Gonzaga being able to convince McNeely, who has one-and-done potential, to come to Spokane into a much murkier playing time situation. So I don't think that the fit is there necessarily. UConn's other two incoming freshmen, one of them's a 6-foot guard, Ahmad Noel, decent player. Don't really see the fit for Gonzaga. The other one's 6'7" wing, Isaiah Abraham, talented player, maybe. Never really connected with Gonzaga prior to being committed at UConn. He's from the East Coast. I just don't see a very obvious fit there. One of UConn's young bigs is Samson Johnson, and I love Samson Johnson. If the Zags could find a way to land Samson Johnson from UConn out of this, that would be extremely extraordinary final piece for Gonzaga's roster. I think the odds of that happening are less than 0.5%. First of all, again, Hurley has to leave. Samson Johnson has to enter the transfer portal. The odds of even both those things happening are fairly slim. If it does, bigs, particularly rim protecting bigs, are at a premium in the transfer portal. Every team will get involved. North Carolina is going to toss a bag at Samson Johnson if he's available. Trust me, they're going to do that. So many other programs are going to do the same. Kentucky might want another front court piece. Arkansas might want another front court piece. USC might want a front court piece. They're going to have more playing time available to offer than Gonzaga would with Samson Johnson. So unfortunately, I don't think that there's a lot of situations where, even if the worst case scenario for UConn happens, where Hurley leaves, they don't retain their assistant coaches, and it's open season, a bunch of players enter the transfer portal, the incoming recruits decide to decommit, look elsewhere. I don't see a lot of scenarios where Gonzaga is changing their roster based on this situation at UConn. But it could mean that Aidan Mahaney doesn't end up playing at UConn. It could mean that Alex Karaban doesn't end up playing at UConn. It could mean Liam McNeely becomes available. It could certainly impact Gonzaga's potential matchup with UConn in mid-December on the 14th. It's also going to be very interesting to see what UConn would, in theory, do looking for a head coach. Steve Peichel is the head coach at Rutgers. He's a former UConn guard. Played for the UConn Huskies, was an assistant coach for the UConn Huskies, has led Rutgers to the tournament in 2 of the last 3 years, which is unprecedented for the Scarlet Knights. He also has 2 of the top players in the incoming recruiting class joining the program in Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. If UConn can convince Steve Peichel to leave Rutgers, come to UConn, potentially bring those 2 top talents with him, that could work. Then maybe they go after Shaka Smart at Marquette. Maybe they go after Shaheen Holloway at Seton Hall. Maybe they go after Billy Donovan, the other coach, to win back-to-back national championships this century. There's some options. Going to be fascinating. We'll talk about it more next week. We'll have some. If Hurley's gone, we're going to talk about it. If Hurley comes back, we're going to talk about it. UConn's a big storyline in college basketball. It's definitely a conversation we're going to continue to have here on Locked On Zags. However, I want to move on to close out the show and the week to talk about the WCC regular season matchups. We don't know the dates. We don't know the times, but what we do know is which teams in the WCC Gonzaga is going to play twice, which 2 teams they're only going to play once. And we know that Gonzaga is in Washington State. It's back. It's back, baby. First time since 2015. They are on the schedule together. We'll get into that in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, switching away from our conversation about Dan Hurley and the UConn Huskies and his pursuit from the Los Angeles Lakers to talk about the WCC regular season schedules revealed on Thursday, the 18 regular season games that Gonzaga will play. They're going to play every team in the conference. They're going to play 8 of the teams in the conference twice. That's 16 games. And then there are 2 teams in the conference that they will play just once. 16 plus 2, 18. That is how you get to your 18-game schedule. It's true for every team. Every team plays 8 teams twice, 2 teams once. That's how it's going to go. That's the breakdown. For the Gonzaga Bulldogs, they will play Steve Lavin and the San Diego Toreros just once at home. There will not be a game for Gonzaga at San Diego, at Jenny Craig Pavilion. They will not get the opportunity to play down there. It's nice to get that little break where you go out to sunny San Diego in the middle of winter and get a chance to play there. Of course, Gonzaga will still get their road games at LMU, their road games at Pepperdine, other road games out in sunnier areas of the country, but they will not get that road game in San Diego. They're also not bringing Pacific to the house. The Tigers of Pacific not coming to the Kennel. New coach Dave Smart won't get his opportunity to face Gonzaga at the McCarthy Athletic Center until the following year. They will play Pacific in Stockton. Kind of a bummer. I don't really love that Pacific game at Stockton. It seems like it always creates a little bit of problems for Gonzaga. It's a wonky arena. I think it's not a place that they play all that well. I'm intrigued by Pacific's future. I don't know that they're going to be great this year. I think it's going to take Coach Smart some time to kind of really build a relationship there, foster a culture, everything that he needs to do to get that program out of the deep cellar in the WCC. But, I think if I had my choice, I would rather play San Diego in San Diego and Pacific at home. But that's not how the cookie crumbled for this series. So Gonzaga gets San Diego once, they get Pacific once. That means they get everybody else twice. And most notably, that means that they get newcomers to the conference, Oregon State and Washington State, in Corvallis and Pullman, respectively. Gonzaga gets both of them at home. They get both of them on the road. Gonzaga is going to play the Washington State Cougars in Pullman this season. That's a big deal. These 2 teams have played each other 150 times in their history, but they have not played a single time since 2015. That's when Gonzaga decided to cancel the series, look for other opportunities in the non-conference. You can't really blame Gonzaga, especially at the time Wazoo was not good. They were not good for the majority of the last 10 years. They got better towards the end of that tenure, thanks in large part to Kyle Smith. He's been a phenomenal coach for that team. He's now the head coach at Stanford. Washington State hires David Riley from Eastern Washington to replace him. Wazoo's gone over as big of a roster overhaul as you can. Every scholarship player from Wazoo's team last year is gone. They're all either in the transfer portal, in the NBA draft process, or out of eligibility. Wazoo has gone to work rebuilding the roster, added some key transfers from multiple places, including quite a few guys coming over from Eastern Washington alongside Coach David Riley. Very excited to see what Wazoo looks like next year, and excited that Gonzaga and Wazoo get a chance to play each other twice. I assumed that would be the case. I didn't think there'd be a situation where the Gonzaga and Wazoo game would only get played once between the two schools. Frankly, I thought it was possible that Gonzaga would only play Oregon State once because they're just not very good, but that's not how it shook out. I'm excited for that too. I think Gonzaga getting an opportunity to play Oregon State in Corvallis will be fun. There is a lot of Portland area, Oregon area Zag fans. I know this from going to the Portland game, from going to whenever years in the past when Gonzaga had played at the Moda Center for non-conference games. It's packed with Gonzaga fans. That Portland game is always packed. And now they get a chance to play in Corvallis, about an hour and a half south of Portland. Really excited to see how that shakes out. Gill Coliseum's a big place, plenty of room for Gonzaga fans. Oregon State fans, I think, will show up because they know that Gonzaga is a big deal, but I think it's going to be a pretty pro-Zag crowd when they get that opportunity in Corvallis. Very excited to see that one shake out as well. Some other interesting tidbits on the scheduling notes here. LMU only got, they kind of drew a weird draw. They get Washington State once and Oregon State once, so they don't get the newcomers. They don't get either of the newcomers twice. They're the only school that falls into that category. I'm also Washington State and Oregon State only playing each other once, which is kind of interesting as well. Two teams that have played each other twice a year for hundreds of years, it feels like, in the history of the Pac-12. And now we'll only get one matchup against each other, even though they're the only two remaining programs from the previous iterations of the Pac-12. Portland and Oregon State get each other twice. That's good for the state of Oregon. It's good for those two schools to get a chance to play each other more regularly. So excited to see how that shakes out. We'll acknowledge, too, that the 18-game schedule, this might be the only year it looks like 18 for right now, because when Grand Canyon and Seattle U join the conference in the 25-26 season, it's possible that they expand the schedule once again to 20 games. It's not confirmed. It's just a possibility. And even if they do that for that season, Oregon State and Washington State are expected to only be in the conference for these next 2 years. So after 25-26, that'll be a one-year overlap with Seattle U, Grand Canyon, Oregon State, Washington State, all in the WCC. After that, those programs are expected to create some new version of the Pac-12, most likely. We're still waiting to see how that's all going to shake out, but they're not expected to be in the WCC beyond that. So they'll probably revert back to an 18-game schedule with Grand Canyon and Seattle U replacing Oregon State and Washington State in that conversation. We'll have more looks at Gonzaga's schedule going forward, non-conference schedule, once we get some of the dates and times for those conference games as well. We'll continue to keep you updated on the Dan Hurley situation, talk about what it means for Gonzaga, what it means for Rui Hachimura. I didn't get into that, but that's an interesting wrinkle in this conversation as well. More NBA draft stuff with Anton Watson, more season in review series, all that stuff coming your way this month here on Locked On Zags. So stick with us. Appreciate all of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Reminder to join us on the Discord channel if you have not done so yet. It is free to join. There's a link in the show notes on audio and video platforms. Folks, have a fantastic weekend. Looking forward to talking to you on Monday. And as always, go Zags.